that, I would like to welcome to the stage Rebecca Hubbard. Rebecca, please, if you can join me. Rebecca is the director of the High Seas Alliance, a global coalition working to protect the half of the planet covered by the high seas, with over 20 years of campaigning experience. I will wait for the music to finish. So as I was mentioning, hi, Rebecca. Rebecca Hubbard is the director of the High Seas Alliance. She has over 20 years of campaigning experience. She has led efforts from Australia to Europe to end overfishing and strengthen ocean protection. In 2025, the High Seas Alliance won the Earthshot Prize in the Revive Our Oceans category, recognizing the High Seas Treaty significance in protecting marine biodiversity in international waters. A pleasure to be with you today here, Rebecca. Very much looking forward for this discussion because it comes quite at a timely manner. You just came from New York, from the PrepCom conversation, so we will be getting into that. But first, I would like to hear from you on, we know that the High Seas Alliance has spent over 20 years working to advance the BBNJ Treaty. After decades of negotiations, the treaty has been ratified in January, as we were mentioning before, this year. I would like us to maybe just take a few steps back, and if you can share with us and explain what the BBNJ Treaty is and how the High Seas Alliance have been working and involved in this sphere.
Well, good morning, Rita, and thank you so much for having us. So just for those of you who may not be international ocean governance experts, which is usually most of us, so the high seas covers 2/3 of the global ocean, or half of the planet. And until this treaty was recently agreed, there was really a huge gap in the governance of the ocean. We've heard about, a lot of overfishing, there's pollution, there's, the impacts of climate change, but the governance system that manages and protects that global ocean had huge gaps, and it was really just about managing exploitation, and in many cases not doing such a great job. So the High Seas Treaty is really the first international law that aims to protect biodiversity in the high seas, so half of the planet. So for the first time, it creates a legal framework for us to be even able to create protected areas in the high seas. It also gives us the ability to conduct thorough and transparent environmental impact assessments of damaging activities beyond protected areas. And there are two other key pillars that really the treaty is known for, which are really essential going forward, and that is really around addressing equity, ocean equity. So the treaty also requires parties to build capacity and transfer technology between developed states and developing states, because we all know that the high seas are a really long way away. They are incredibly expensive to get to and to conduct research in. And so traditionally, the parties, states and corporations that have benefited from the global commons, from the benefits, from the resources in the high seas have been from wealthy nations. So really the treaty also aims to address that inequity and really boost the capacity of developing states. So that's also around the fair and equitable sharing of benefits, both data, so non-financial and financial benefits. So it's really the biggest thing that's happened in ocean governance in literally decades, and really is unlocking potential for us to start to protect the high seas like we've never been able to before.
Excellent. And I think on that point, more related to that equity, I think it's quite an important element in particular, because we tend to have, and it happens a lot in the negotiations, right, where you have the division between the different views of the developing nations and the developed nations, and it's particularly important to make sure that those safeguards are also put in place in order to make sure that that equity component is there. And talking about negotiations, of course, we had the treaty being ratified, and we had the treaty entering into force in January, but maybe taking a step even forward. Now we're moving towards the preparation for the next and first COP that will be taking place, as we now know, next year in January. We have an official date. You just came flying literally yesterday night from New York and from those negotiations. Can you share with us what have been the main elements that have taken place in the last week? And I understand that the negotiations continue. And what are the most important steps that need to happen now to turn the treaty into real protection for the ocean?
So just as a bit of an overview, for the treaty to enter into force and become international law, which it just did, we needed 60 countries to ratify that. And so that happened in September last year. We now have 86 countries, or 85 countries plus the EU as party to the treaty. But to make it as effective as possible across the whole world, we really want as many countries to ratify the treaty as possible. So we're going from 60 to global, because that means we will be able to implement it across the world. So that's a really, really key element that we need to keep in mind, because as we go forward, so as we've said, it's entered into force in January. We need to have the first High Seas Treaty, or BBNJ COP, within 1 year, so that will happen in January of 2027. And at that meeting, the state parties, so those countries that have ratified, will decide on the key infrastructure and the decision-making procedures which will operationalize the treaty. So it's really essential that we get these key pieces of infrastructure and operating principles right, so that the treaty can be efficient, it can be effective, it can be transparent, it can be inclusive, ensuring that Indigenous peoples and traditional knowledge are included, as well as observers, non-state parties, civil society, scientists. So, and to ensure it is well financed. So these are kind of really, they seem very procedural, and that honestly, the negotiations are quite boring, but they're incredibly important, because deciding who gets to vote, how they get to make decisions, who is in the room, what information is made public, is going to be essential to ensuring we can achieve the ambition of the treaty. And that ambition is obviously to protect at least a third of the high seas, to do it equitably, and to ensure that all people around the world are engaged in this process. So those decisions are the things that they're discussing in New York last week, and will continue this week until Thursday.
Great. And of course, those, when we talk about procedural negotiations, maybe it might not be the most, widely known or widely reported on, but I think, as you mentioned, it's really laying the ground and the foundation to ensuring that that our ambition is actually taken into account, and that it's transparent, and we have accountability systems set in place in order to reach that. My last question to you, Beck, is because we talk a lot about, and we've been discussing in the last few minutes about the role of parties and the role of governments on negotiating the treaty, on ratifying the treaty, but maybe looking more towards the wider community. How is the High Seas Alliance helping drive momentum, and how can civil society and broader ocean community contribute?
So it's really essential that we do continue with this momentum. The High Seas Treaty has really gathered a lot of momentum. We have seen it. It really, at the moment, does seem like a beacon of hope for multilateralism. It's one of the few spaces where we have countries from all regions of the world agreeing, signing up, pushing forward with political ambition. So it's essential that governments keep that momentum going, and that they drive that at both regional forums and international forums. And for that to happen, we all know we need to create political momentum, you need political will, and for that you need citizens, civil society, and other stakeholders to really unite and push those decision makers to be accountable. Don't just stop on words on paper. Don't give us another declaration that you will implement the treaty. Actually take steps. Start preparing proposals for high seas marine protected areas. Start committing more funds to ensure that we can implement it and we can protect places. So in terms of the governments, that's what they really need to do. In terms of civil society, we all really need to hold those governments and decision makers accountable. For a scientific community, I think it's really key that we start to share data, share tools, really work together. There is no other place like the high seas that emphasizes the need for collaboration and coordination. We absolutely cannot do it alone. I think Lewis made that very clear, but the high seas is a clear example of that. And then I think finally, just to touch back on the finance, we really, really need private finance to be contributing to protection of the high seas. We cannot rely on governments. We know that's not going to be enough. So I think Adrian's points on user pays are absolutely essential and part of the area we really need to drive forward on and really secure that innovative funding.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Becca. And maybe just one last thought from you. What is something that really makes you optimistic about the High Seas Treaty? If you could mention it in one sentence.
I think it's the fact that we have seen already so many countries work together. You know, we saw countries negotiate for 20 years, to discuss and negotiate for 20 years. And that was countries, it was civil society, scientists, indigenous people, lawyers. You know, across all the sectors, people have collaborated. We have 134 signatories to the treaty, so those that have committed to ratifying. We can do this. We have made huge progress. And I think to draw from Kate Wawatai from Aotearoa, hope is a discipline. We have to practice it daily. So let's just keep doing that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you.